The late afternoon sun hung low above the horizon, spreading a golden wash across South Point Motors. The dealership shimmered under the glow. Chrome and glass caught the light like mirrors, reflecting a world that moved at the brisk rhythm of sales and ambition. Engines murmured, laughter rose from customers comparing models, and somewhere in the back, a compressor hissed from the service bay. To the regulars, it was just another profitable day. A modest silver sedan rolled to a stop near the far end of the lot. From it stepped a tall man in his late 30s, Taryn Cole. His clothing was simple but precise. Crisp white shirt, dark slacks, leather shoes polished until they gleamed. He paused for a moment, eyes sweeping the rows of vehicles as though measuring not just their price tags, but the spirit of the place itself. Taryn was no ordinary visitor. He was the new owner of South Point Motors, having finalized the acquisition barely a week earlier. Yet today, he didn't arrive with announcements or fanfare. He wanted authenticity, a first-hand glimpse of how his employees behaved when they believed no one important was watching. He adjusted his watch, took a quiet breath, and began walking toward the main showroom. Inside, the air was cool and scented with the faint perfume of new upholstery and fresh polish. A large LED screen cycled through commercials, promising unbeatable financing and 5-year warranties. The sales floor pulsed with movement. Phones ringing, deals being whispered, the shuffle of paperwork. Taryn walked in unhurried, scanning the displays. He lingered near a cherry-red SUV, reading the specs printed on the windshield. He looked calm, perhaps too calm. From behind a desk near the center of the floor, Margaret Holt, the dealership's manager, noticed him. Margaret was the sort of person whose presence demanded attention. Navy blazer, posture as sharp as her tone, every step punctuated by the click of heels that signaled authority. She built her career on numbers, sales closed, goals met, and she tolerated nothing that slowed the rhythm of her floor. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the unfamiliar man in the white shirt. He wasn't dressed like a typical buyer. There was no watchful excitement, no quick glances toward a salesperson for assistance. Instead, he moved with quiet deliberation, jotting notes on his phone. Something about that unsettled her. She stood, smoothed the lapel of her blazer, and strode across the showroom. The echo of her heels sliced through the chatter until the room seemed to tilt toward their meeting. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone crisp, not unkind but edged with suspicion. Taryn turned toward her and offered a polite smile. "Just looking around, thank you." "Browsing," she repeated, lips tightening. "Well, if you're interested in financing, one of my team can assist you. But if you're only window shopping, I'd prefer my staff focus on active buyers." Her words were firm, impersonal, yet something colder flickered beneath them, an assumption drawn not from behavior but appearance. Taryn kept his composure. "I appreciate the information. I'd like to take my time if that's all right." "Just don't touch anything without asking first," she replied curtly, turning away. A few employees exchanged uneasy glances. The tone was unmistakable. Still, no one intervened. Taryn continued his slow circuit around the showroom. He leaned in to inspect a dashboard, traced his gaze along the design lines of a coupe, took another note. He looked less like a buyer and more like an auditor, though no one realized how close that truth was. When he passed by the finance desk, the young salesman there, Eddie, looked up as if wanting to greet him. Margaret's earlier glare, however, lingered in his memory, and he lowered his eyes instead. After several minutes, the rhythm of the dealership resumed, though a thread of unease wove through it. Margaret reappeared, this time with her arms crossed. "I noticed you've been wandering for quite some time," she said, voice lowered but sharp. "If you're not serious about buying, I'll have to ask you to leave. We don't allow distractions." Taryn glanced up from the sticker price he'd been studying. "I'm not distracting anyone. I have every right to be here." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Look, I've seen this before, people wasting our time, asking for test drives and vanishing when it's time to talk numbers. We run a business here. If you're not ready to buy, you need to go." Taryn's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "I think you're making some assumptions about me." "I think I know my job," she snapped. Either show me you're serious or I'll handle this my way. For a heartbeat, the air between them seemed to still. Conversations in the showroom dimmed, replaced by a hush of expectation. Taryn exhaled softly. "Handle it your way," he asked, voice calm but firm. "What exactly does that mean?" Margaret straightened. "It means I make sure my team and customers feel comfortable, and right now, you're making people uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable because I'm looking at cars," he said, his tone even, "in a car dealership." The slight lift of his eyebrow unsettled her more than anger ever could. "Look," she hissed, stepping closer. "We've had enough people pretending to buy, wasting our time. Unless you're planning a purchase, please leave." "I don't recall asking for a test drive," Taryn replied. "I'm just observing. Is that against policy?" Her cheeks flushed. "You're disrupting my staff, and I won't allow that." "Then perhaps," Taryn said mildly, "I should speak with someone higher up." She gave a short laugh, sharp, humorless. "Higher up? I'm the manager. There's no one else you need to speak to." "Good to know," he said, sliding his hands into his pockets. That quiet confidence unnerved her. She turned abruptly, marched to the nearest desk, and snatched up the phone. "If you won't leave on your own," she said, punching numbers, "I'll have someone escort you out." Taryn watched, unruffled. "You're calling the police," he observed, "because I'm looking at cars." Her voice hardened as she spoke into the receiver. "Yes, there's a man here being uncooperative, refusing to leave after multiple requests." A few employees froze mid-motion. The receptionist whispered, "Is she serious?" But no one dared step forward. Taryn simply folded his arms and waited, eyes steady on the manager, who had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. When Margaret hung up, she turned back toward him with a look of triumph, mistaking authority for righteousness. "The police will be here shortly," she announced. "I suggest you wait outside." Taryn's voice stayed level. "Why would I wait outside? I haven't done anything wrong." "You're trespassing," she snapped. "That's enough." At that exact moment, the glass doors opened, and an elderly couple walked in, chatting cheerfully, until they sensed the tension that had settled like fog. Their smiles faltered. A salesman hurried to greet them, murmuring a nervous welcome. Margaret turned away, pretending composure. Taran stood quietly, scrolling through his phone, his calmness only deepening her irritation. "You're not taking this seriously, are you?" she said. He met her eyes. "I take respect seriously. You don't seem to, so here we are." Her reply died on her lips when two uniformed police officers stepped through the door, scanning the room. And just like that, every conversation stopped. The entire showroom froze. The hum of conversation, the rustle of papers, even the faint tapping of computer keys, all of it stopped as two uniformed police officers stepped through the glass doors of South Point Motors. One officer was tall and broad-shouldered, his face professional but wary. The other was shorter, older, his gaze measured and calm. The pair scanned the room, taking in the uneasy energy that hung between Margaret Holt, the dealership manager, and the tall, composed man standing quietly by a gleaming SUV, Taran Cole. Margaret straightened her blazer as if rehearsing her authority. She stepped forward and pointed toward Taran. "That's him," she said crisply. "He's been asked to leave several times and refuses to comply." A murmur rippled through the staff. Everyone knew what they were seeing was no ordinary customer dispute. The taller officer nodded slightly and approached Taran with careful steps. "Sir," he said evenly, "we received a call about a disturbance. Can we speak with you for a moment?" "Of course," Taran replied, his tone steady, unthreatening. He slipped his phone into his pocket and folded his hands in front of him. "I'm happy to clarify anything." The officer studied him for a beat, sensing no hostility. "According to the report," he said, "you were asked to leave and refused." Taran offered a polite smile. "I walked in to look at cars. I've made no demands, raised no voice, and touched nothing. Apparently that's been taken as cause for concern." Before the officer could respond, Margaret interjected sharply. "You were told to leave. You're disrupting business and I won't allow that." The shorter officer raised a hand in her direction, his voice calm. "Ma'am, please let us handle this." Her lips tightened, but she fell silent, crossing her arms. Taran turned back to the officers. "I'd like to show you something," he said. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, deliberate, careful, and drew out a slim leather wallet. From it, he pulled a folded document and extended it to the taller officer. "This should clear everything up." The officer unfolded the paper and began to read. His brows lifted almost immediately. He handed it to his partner, who scanned it, then looked up at Taran with widened eyes. "Mr. Cole," the shorter officer said slowly, "you're the new owner." Taran nodded once. "Yes, I finalized the acquisition of South Point Motors last week. I came today unannounced to observe how things were being run." A silence fell so deep it was almost physical. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and every employee within earshot stopped pretending to work. Mugrat's face went slack, her confidence collapsing in real time. "Wait, what?" she stammered. You're the owner." Taran's expression remained neutral. "That's correct." The taller officer cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. We'll step aside unless you need our assistance." "No, officers," Taran replied with calm dignity. "You've handled this professionally. I appreciate that." The officers exchanged a respectful nod and began to retreat toward the entrance. The taller one paused just long enough to give Mugrat a brief, disapproving look before exiting. As the glass doors closed behind them, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. Mugrat stood motionless, color draining from her face. The authority she'd wielded moments ago now hung around her like a broken chain. I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling. "No one told me we had a new owner." Taran's gaze held steady. "And that justifies how you treated me?" he asked quietly. "I thought—" He cut her off, his tone still calm but laced with steel. "You thought what? That I didn't belong here. That someone who looks like me couldn't possibly be a serious customer, let alone your boss." The words landed like blows. Mugrat opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The employees around the showroom were frozen, pretending not to listen though every eye was fixed on the scene. Taran continued, his voice controlled but firm. "You didn't speak to me as a manager welcoming a potential customer. You spoke to me like a problem to be removed." "I was only trying to do my job," she whispered. "No," he said, "you were trying to protect your sense of control. And now you've shown me exactly what kind of environment this dealership has become." Mugrat's hands shook. "I didn't mean I was just—" "Assuming," Taran finished for her. "Yes, you were assuming. That's exactly the problem." The weight of the moment settled hard on her shoulders. A few employees exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to look away or bear witness. The receptionist at the front desk, a young man with glasses, shifted uneasily. The elderly couple who had walked in moments before sat at a nearby sales desk, whispering to each other in disbelief. Mugrat's voice broke slightly. "Please, Mr. Cole, if I had known." He held up a hand. "But you didn't. You didn't care to find out. You decided who I was before I even spoke." Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes, her composure fracturing. I was only trying to keep things professional." Taran's eyes softened, but his tone didn't. Professionalism without respect is just arrogance in disguise. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He took a step closer, his voice quieter but sharper. "Sorry doesn't undo what you've shown me today. You represent this dealership, Mugrat. When you make judgments like that, you don't just humiliate yourself, you tarnish the entire brand. You've shown your staff that prejudice has a place here. It doesn't." Her breath hitched. "Please, Mr. Cole, I've been here 10 years. I've built this place from the ground up. This is just one mistake." He regarded her for a long moment, eyes unreadable. "One mistake," he repeated softly. "Calling the police on the owner of the business you work for because you thought he didn't belong." She looked down at the floor, her shoulders trembling. "You didn't just make a mistake," he continued. "You revealed your mindset, and that's something I can't ignore. Across the showroom, no one spoke. Even the steady background music had stopped, leaving the room steeped in tension and shame. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Please, I'll make it right." "You can't make it right," Taryn said, "but you can learn from it. You can decide whether this moment changes you or defines you." He turned to the gathered staff, his tone now rising with authority. "To everyone watching, take note. Leadership is not about power. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching." No one dared move. His voice carried the kind of weight that didn't come from volume but conviction. Margaret pressed her lips together, her eyes wet. Are you going to fire me?" she asked, her voice breaking. Taryn looked at her for a long moment. "That depends on what you value more," he said finally. "Your job or your integrity. Either way, this will be addressed." He stepped past her, turning to the receptionist. "Would you please bring me the operations file from the back office?" The young man nodded quickly and hurried away, grateful for an excuse to move. Margaret stood there, trembling, the full weight of humiliation settling in. Around her, the same employees she had once ruled with sharp commands and cold stares now looked at her with pity. When Taryn returned to the center of the floor, document in hand, he addressed her again, voice calm but final. "I came here today for one reason," he said. "To see the truth of how this place operates when no one's watching. I didn't expect a performance like this, but maybe it's what I needed to see." Margaret opened her mouth, but no sound came. He continued, "What I saw today isn't just about you. It's about culture, fear, judgment. Those things can destroy a company faster than any bad sales quarter." She clasped her shaking hands. "Please, just give me a chance to prove." "You had your chance," he said gently, "the moment I walked through that door." The words hung heavy in the air, not loud, but absolute. And with that, everything changed. For a long moment after Taryn's final words, no one in the dealership dared to move. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Margaret's eyes glistened with tears, her confidence shattered. Every employee in the showroom stood frozen, unsure whether to speak, look away, or simply disappear. Then the front doors opened again, this time not with police officers, but with two sharply dressed individuals in tailored suits. One was a tall man in his 40s, carrying a leather briefcase. The other, a woman with an iPad tucked under her arm and the unmistakable poise of someone used to leading board meetings. They walked straight toward Taryn. "Mr. Cole," the man said respectfully, "we've completed the initial audit. The transition paperwork is ready for signature whenever you'd like to finalize the internal announcement." Taryn gave a small nod, his expression composed. "Thank you, David. I think now's the perfect time." The woman beside him, Elena Vargas, head of public relations for the Cole Automotive Group, glanced around the silent room. Her eyes flicked briefly to Margaret, taking in the situation without a word. She then turned to Taryn and asked quietly, "Would you like to address the staff first, or shall I prepare the release?" Taryn's gaze swept the room, every nervous face, every bowed head. He took a slow breath and said, "No press release, not yet. Let's talk to them first." Elena nodded and stepped back. Taryn turned to face the employees, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Everyone, please gather around. This concerns all of you." Chairs scraped, conversations murmured. Within moments, the entire staff, from sales reps to service technicians, formed a loose semicircle around him. Some looked anxious, others curious. A few exchanged uncertain glances with Margaret, who stood pale and silent. Taryn began, "As many of you have heard, I'm Taryn Cole, the new owner of South Point Motors. My acquisition was finalized last week as part of a broader expansion of Cole Automotive Group. Some of you may already know our name. We operate dealerships in Denver, Austin, Seattle, and now, right here." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. A few whispered, connecting the dots. Cole Automotive was a powerhouse brand, known for innovation, ethics, and customer loyalty. Taryn continued, "I came here today without announcement for a simple reason. I wanted to see this place through unfiltered eyes. I wanted to understand how my future employees, all of you, treat people before they know who's watching. He paused. No one spoke. What I found, he said quietly, was a lesson, a painful one. He turned slightly toward Margaret, but didn't look at her directly. When leadership loses its humanity, everything beneath it starts to rot, even if the sales numbers look fine. The way a customer is treated, the way respect is distributed, the assumptions that get made, that's what defines a company. Not the cars, not the money, the people. A low murmur went through the group. The service manager shifted uncomfortably. One of the younger salesmen, barely in his 20s, looked visibly shaken. Taryn continued, his tone measured. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came here to understand what needs fixing, and now I understand perfectly. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a folder, thick with printed reports. This, he said, holding it up, is your performance history. Sales are decent, customer retention is moderate, but employee turnover is high, too high. That tells me one thing, people don't feel valued here. They feel managed, not led. He closed the folder gently. That ends today. The room fell utterly still. Taryn looked around the group, meeting eyes as he spoke. Starting next week, every department will undergo retraining, not in sales techniques, not in product knowledge, but in respect, inclusion, and leadership culture. This dealership is going to become a case study in what it means to build from the ground up with empathy. He turned toward Margaret now, his tone soft but unyielding. Ms. Holt, you've been here for 10 years, yes? Her voice trembled. Yes, sir. You've built strong numbers, a large client base, and a recognizable name in this region. But you've also built an atmosphere of fear, one where authority replaces kindness. That stops now. Tears welled up again in her eyes. Please, I can change. I didn't mean to. Taryn interrupted gently. I believe you can change, but whether you will is something I'll need to see, not here. I'm placing you on temporary leave for 2 weeks. You'll attend the leadership retraining personally, and if, at the end of that period, you still want this job, we'll talk again. The words were firm, but not cruel. He wasn't destroying her, he was forcing her to face herself. Margaret's lip quivered, but she nodded. Yes, sir, I understand. Taryn turned back to the rest. And as for everyone else, know this, I don't fire people for mistakes. I fire people for refusing to grow. What happened here today was not just a misunderstanding. It was a mirror held up to our values. The question is, what do you see in that reflection? The silence was thick, but this time it carried something new, respect. Then Alina stepped forward, tablet in hand. Mr. Cole, she said, I've drafted the internal announcement. Would you like me to circulate it to the staff? He nodded. Please do. She tapped a few lines on the screen and then looked up. Done, it's official. Almost immediately, phones buzzed across the room. A company-wide message appeared on everyone's screen. From Cole Automotive Group. Subject, new leadership announcement. Effective immediately, South Point Motors will operate under the leadership of Mr. Taryn Cole, CEO of Cole Automotive Group. This transition represents a new chapter focused on integrity, equality, and excellence in customer experience. Employees glanced at each other, the reality of what was happening beginning to sink in. Some looked relieved, others stunned. One brave employee, a young woman from marketing, finally spoke up. Mr. Cole, thank you for handling this the way you did. Most people would have just fired everyone on the spot. Taryn smiled faintly. If I did that, I'd lose the opportunity to teach something bigger than policy. Culture doesn't change from punishment. It changes from awareness. He walked slowly toward the front window, where sunlight streamed across the polished cars. The reflection of the dealership sign glimmered faintly on the hood of a crimson SUV. You see, he said, turning back to the staff, wealth doesn't impress me, power doesn't intimidate me, but humanity, that's what earns my respect. The world is full of smart people who forget to be kind. I don't intend to run one of their companies. A murmur of quiet agreement rippled through the group. At the edge of the room, Margaret stood motionless, humbled, exposed, but perhaps in some small way beginning to understand. Elena approached Taryn quietly. "We've already had reporters reach out about the acquisition. They'll want a quote." He thought for a moment, then said, "Tell them this. Sometimes the most revealing test of leadership is how people act when they think no one important is watching." Elena smiled slightly. "That'll make headlines." He shrugged lightly. "Then maybe it'll make a few people think." As the staff began to disperse, quietly, thoughtfully, Taryn lingered a moment longer in the middle of the showroom. The dealership no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place waiting to be rebuilt. He turned toward Margaret, who stood near her desk, clutching a file to her chest. "Ms. Holt," he said softly, "I meant what I said. This doesn't have to be your ending unless you choose to make it one." She nodded weakly. "I'll do better, I promise." "I hope you do," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "Because the next time I walk in here, I won't be testing anyone. I'll be trusting them." And with that, Taryn Cole, the man who'd walked in as a stranger and revealed himself as a lesson, stepped out into the afternoon sun. 2 weeks had passed since that unforgettable day at South Point Motors, the day that stripped the dealership of its pretense and left every employee, especially Margaret Holt, face to face with the truth. The atmosphere had changed. The air, once sharp with competition and quiet judgment, now carried something unfamiliar: humility. The morning sun spilled through the glass facade, catching flecks of dust that danced lazily in the light. The sales desks were quieter now. Conversations were softer. Even the receptionist, who once greeted customers with mechanical cheer, now smiled like he meant it. Margaret walked in quietly, wearing no heels this time, just simple flats and a light gray coat. Her usual confident stride had softened. The click of authority had been replaced by the silence of self-awareness. Every step she took through the showroom reminded her of that humiliating moment, when she'd called the police on the man who turned out to be her new boss. She could still hear his calm voice echoing in her memory. "Professionalism, without respect, is just arrogance in disguise." Those words haunted her, but they also guided her. During her mandatory leadership retraining, Margaret had sat through lectures on empathy, bias, and workplace inclusion. At first, she resisted, mentally rolling her eyes at the corporate platitudes. But then she met Dr. Naomi Fielder, the consultant leading the sessions. Naomi had a way of cutting through excuses with gentleness that left no room for denial. "You don't have to hate someone to discriminate against them," Naomi had said in one session. "All it takes is an unchecked assumption." That sentence struck Margaret harder than she expected, because that's exactly what she'd done, made an assumption. About a man's worth, about his place, about what he could afford or who he might be. She hadn't realized it then, but in that single moment of prejudice, she had undone years of hard-earned reputation. By the 3rd day of training, she stopped defending herself. She listened. She took notes. She reflected. Now, back in the dealership, she felt the strange mix of guilt and gratitude that only true self-realization can bring. At her desk, she opened her email and saw the subject line that made her heart pound. "Meeting with Mr. Cole, 10:00 a.m. Margaret inhaled deeply. This is it. The meeting. At precisely 10, she knocked gently on the door of the newly renovated executive office, Taryn's office. The frosted glass bore the fresh etching. "T. Cole, CEO, South Point Motors." "Come in," his voice called from inside. She pushed open the door. Taryn sat behind a sleek black desk, reading a report. His presence was calm but commanding, the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said softly. He looked up, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he smiled faintly. "Good morning, Miss Holt. Please sit." She sat across from him, hands folded nervously on her lap. "I trust the training went well," he asked. "Yes," she said quickly, then paused. "No, actually it went beyond well. It was uncomfortable and necessary." He nodded slightly, waiting for her to continue. I learned more about myself in those 2 weeks than I did in 10 years of managing this place, she admitted. I used to think leadership meant control, that authority came from being feared, but I see now all that does is build walls between people. Taryn studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, "And what do you think leadership means now?" Margaret thought carefully. It means listening before judging, guiding instead of demanding. Creating a space where people feel seen, not managed. Taryn smiled faintly. Good answer. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. He leaned back in his chair. You know, Margaret, when I came here that day, I wasn't just testing this dealership. I was testing a theory. Her brows furrowed. A theory. Yes, he said. I wanted to know whether a place can still succeed when people forget the human part of business, whether respect can survive ambition. And you, unintentionally, gave me my answer. She lowered her gaze, ashamed. I gave you a reason to regret buying this place. He shook his head. No, you gave me a reason to rebuild it. Margaret looked up, surprised. I've dealt with worse, he said. In my career, I've seen companies that look polished on the outside but rot from within because of arrogance, ego, and fear. What happened here wasn't corruption, it was blindness. And blindness can be cured with awareness. For the first time since that day, she smiled faintly. I want to earn back your trust, Mr. Cole. You're already starting to, he said simply. By showing up, by owning it, by changing. There was a long, quiet pause, not awkward, just real. Then, Taryn stood and walked to the window. Do you know why I started in this industry, Margaret? No, sir. He turned, looking at her thoughtfully. Because when I was 17, I went to a dealership with my father. We were both dressed in old work clothes from the construction site. The salesman ignored us for 30 minutes until another customer, wearing a suit, walked in. That man got the attention we didn't, so we left. He smiled faintly. My father told me, one day, son, you'll own a place like this, and when you do, make sure everyone who walks in feels equal. Margaret's eyes softened. That's powerful. He nodded. It stayed with me. So when I walked into this dealership that day and saw history repeating itself, I knew it was time for another lesson. Silence filled the room for a moment, not uncomfortable, but contemplative. Margaret finally said, I wish I could go back and undo it. You can't, Taryn replied gently. But you can do the next best thing, make sure no one else ever feels what I felt that day. She nodded firmly. I will. He smiled again, extending his hand. Then welcome back, Miss Holt. Let's build something better. She stood, shaking his hand, her grip firm, her eyes steady. Thank you, sir, for giving me another chance. As she turned to leave, he said, Margaret. She paused. Don't thank me, he said with a half smile. Thank yourself. You did the hard part, you faced the mirror. She nodded slowly. I understand. The chain. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary began to happen. Employees noticed that Margaret no longer barked orders. She asked questions. She listened. She even apologized, something she had never done before. One afternoon, a nervous young salesman approached her, fumbling with a customer's paperwork. Ms. Holt, I think I messed this up, he stammered. Instead of snapping, she smiled kindly. Then let's fix it together. We all learn that way. Word spread. The staff's energy began to shift. Customers noticed. Reviews improved. The dealership's once cynical atmosphere turned cooperative, even hopeful. And every few days, Taryn would quietly visit, not as the intimidating owner, but as a mentor. He'd sit with employees, listen to their challenges, and remind them that respect costs nothing but changes everything. Within 2 months, South Point Motors recorded its highest customer satisfaction ratings in 5 years. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the last of the staff clocked out, Margaret stood by the showroom window, watching the reflection of the glowing sign outside. South Point Motors, a coal automotive company. For the first time, she smiled, not with pride but with peace. Behind her, Taryn's voice broke the silence. It's starting to look like the place I imagined. She turned and smiled. It's starting to feel like it too. He nodded approvingly. Keep it that way. I will, she said softly. As he left, she looked once more at the shining reflection in the glass, and for the first time in a long time, she saw herself clearly. Not as the manager she used to be, but as the leader she was becoming.